Pocket FM.
To unlock all the episodes, click the link in bio.
Jacob was surprised when he opened the door to his hotel room and found Sophie standing outside. She asked him if he'd like to go and eat. Though they had spent a lot of time together, he didn't think Sophie was all that interested in him. But maybe she was trying. He turned around and picked up his keycard and said, "Let's go." Sophie secretly felt relieved, as she was totally expecting Jacob to say no. She had already asked too much of him during the hike. She almost went out by herself, but being a stranger to this place, she would hate to eat out alone. If only her parents were around, or her stomach was not violently voicing its dissatisfaction, she would not have come to ask out Jacob. The two walked out of the hotel and began looking for restaurants. It was already past 9, and they had to find something before it was 10 o'clock at night. Most of the restaurants had already closed. Not knowing where to look, they searched somewhat aimlessly in the areas close to the hotel. The hunt for the restaurant made them hungrier. Afraid that she might get lost, Sophie made sure to stay close to Jacob. Walking along a somewhat desolate street, they finally spotted a small restaurant ahead of them that was still open. They rushed into the restaurant and were about to place an order for 2 plates of food when they realized that there were a few shady guys sitting inside with a muscular build. One was bald, one had a mohawk, and the other had a long, shabby head of hair. Their clothes were either old or messy, or they were shirtless altogether. They seemed to have been drinking for hours and were cursing a lot while talking to each other. Sophie was scared and wanted to drag Jacob out of the restaurant. Jacob, on the other hand, gently grabbed her hand and comforted her by saying, "It's okay." He was starving and knew Sophie was too, and they had no energy to look for any other restaurants. Besides, it was impossible to find another restaurant that was open at this hour. He led Sophie to a corner table, and they both sat down. He then said to the owner, who had come up to greet them, "2 meatloafs, gravy, peas, mashed potatoes, and some fried chicken, please." He ordered on Sophie's behalf as well, because the restaurant didn't have much to offer. Besides, he didn't want them to stay there for too long. Sophie was terrified and was constantly observing the dangerous men around them and was too preoccupied to object to Jacob. "The cards are not in your favor tonight, buddy. All your money is mine." "You're such a sloppy drunk. You're spilling ketchup all over me." "Deal again. You're cheating." The men at the other tables were drinking as well as they played poker and blackjack. The more they drank, the more their voices grew louder. Sophie thought for a moment and decided to move from the seat across from Jacob to the one beside him. Her alarmed and panicky look made him reach out and hold her hand. She seemed to feel much better after that and became slightly comfortable. Soon, the piping hot chicken and meatloaf was served. They hungrily devoured the food without caring where to start and where to end the meal. They were famished. Their dinner etiquette was so synchronized that they appeared like a compatible couple to the onlookers. After dinner, the two felt that their stomachs had been filled with warmth. Sophie refused to stay in the restaurant for any longer and asked Jacob to pay the bill, and they got out of there immediately. The little town at the foot of the mountain was incredibly quiet. As they walked, the moon was shining gently on both of them, projecting their shadows on the smooth concrete path. One was tall and the other was short. Observing that their shadows were touching each other, Sophie suddenly realized that she was walking too close to Jacob and stepped away. Out of nowhere, a wildcat appeared and caused Sophie to jump up and move closer to Jacob again. Facing her, Jacob once again gave her his hand to hold. Sophie looked at him and paused for a few seconds. "Just for a little while," she said, and placed her hand into Jacob's palm. As she gave her hand to hold, she no longer felt anxious and uneasy. Instead, she felt calm. Nothing was scaring her anymore, and she was walking pretty happily with Jacob holding her hand. Jacob was quiet during the walk. He focused on leading her back to the hotel safely by following the same path they had taken during their restaurant hunt. A peaceful small town, a serene mountain range, light breathing, gentle footsteps, and the slight warmth of the hand. It was all so tranquil for Sophie. She had never felt this way before. It felt good. She felt like she belonged. She felt protected. After walking for about 15 minutes, they arrived at the parking lot in front of the hotel. Jacob let go of Sophie's hand. Sophie realized that she had been enjoying the walk and found herself slightly disappointed that it was over. Her face had turned bright red as she somehow found herself listless and extremely tired. Abruptly, she went into the hotel looking somewhat confused. Jacob had no clue what was going on in her head. All he knew was that Sophie was pretty tired from the day and shook up because of the rowdy crowd at dinner. Following her, Jacob walked into the hotel and returned to his room. To his surprise, he discovered that Dracon wasn't back. Sophie's parents must be busy catching up with their friends and lost track of time, he thought. He lay down on the bed and opened Sophie's pink backpack. He took out the camera and found that they had only taken 2 photos with it the entire day. He looked at the photo where Sophie was sitting on the boulder and looking up angrily with her cheeks puffed up. She looks like a tomato when she's angry. Jacob shook his head and laughed as he put away the camera. After he finished taking a hot shower, he realized that Dracon had come back. Dracon briefly inquired about their day on the mountain, and Jacob also replied in a nutshell. Without any further questioning, Dracon nodded, acknowledging his response, and went for a shower. Feeling nervous and awkward, Jacob got into bed. He was guessing that in the room across from theirs, Helen must be asking Sophie about their day as well. It had been a scary and thrilling day. Nevertheless, he had successfully brought Sophie down without anyone getting hurt. Tired and exhausted, Jacob quickly fell asleep before Dracon could even come out of the bathroom. When he woke up the next day, Jacob found Dracon sitting on the sofa watching TV. "Were you exhausted yesterday?" Dracon asked as he saw that Jacob had woken up. "A little bit," Jacob answered. "We are going to eat at a homestay nearby in a bit. Afterward, we will be heading home," Dracon told him. "Okay." Jacob nodded his head. He thought for a second and spoke again. "Thank you for bringing me along. It meant a lot to me." "We were happy to do that. Now, go, freshen up." Dracon walked over to the window and opened the curtains. It was drizzling outside, and it seemed to be a foggy day. The mountain view was hazy but splendid. A cold breeze came in through the window and made the room temperature seem colder. It was way cooler than yesterday, but it was refreshing. Jacob put on his shirt and went over to the bathroom to freshen up. When he was ready, he followed Dracon out, and they went to knock on the door across from theirs. When the door opened, Helen appeared, and Sophie was followed closely behind her mother. Sophie was wearing a milky white t-shirt with a pair of purple joggers. It looked good on her. Jacob couldn't help but admire her beauty. Both mother and daughter were each wearing a straw hat. The coffee-colored, broad-brimmed straw hat perfectly matched the dark and light patches on Helen's floral dress, accentuating her elegance. Oddly enough, the straw hat seemed a little out of place with the rest of Sophie's ensemble, but she looked cute. "Let's go." Helen tenderly held onto Sophie's hand as she gave her keycard to Dracon. Dracon led Jacob, and the 4 of them walked towards the hotel reception. Walking through the winding corridor of the hotel, Jacob saw Wildcat Mountain. Showered with drizzling rain and mist, it looked like an impressionistic landscape painting. As the weekend came to an end, Jacob genuinely felt like he was a part of the Dragon family.
Please subscribe to the Pocket FM YouTube channel and press the bell icon for instant notification. Check out our channel for more such exciting shows.
After checking out of the hotel, Dracon drove them to another site in the small town near the Wildcat Mountain. It was constantly raining on the way, and since their windows were up, the ride was a bit gloomy. Sophie quietly played with the edges of her long t-shirt while looking at the rain. She changed to a different style of clothes than what she usually wore because the weather was a bit chilly today. Jacob had borrowed a shirt from Dracon, as the one he wore yesterday was completely drenched in sweat. Jacob was stealing glances at Sophie, who looked even more appealing in the foggy weather. The car stopped in front of a courtyard house. The owner heard the car driving in and came out to greet the four of them zealously. Jacob noticed that a lot of old people lived in the small town at the foothills of the mountain. Due to the rain, they were all chatting on the benches underneath the shade instead of going out for walks. "It's a great resort for elders who want to retire," Helen turned around and explained to Jacob. Jacob suddenly understood. This place was near the mountain. The weather mostly remained beautiful and the air was always fresh. It was indeed an excellent place for retirement. The owner led them to a small backyard. Beyond the backyard, Jacob discovered a beautiful green patch in which there was a small alfresco restaurant. It was well hidden from the tourists. Bamboo fences, frames covered with grapevines, antique-looking square tables, and a small vegetable patch with loads of vegetables growing in it. All of this reminded Jacob of his childhood. Dracon found a table, sat down, and gestured to the others to take a seat as well. There were only 4 tables there, and it wasn't as noisy as other restaurants. It was still drizzling, but there was a parasol at the table keeping everyone's hair dry. The green cornfield kept on swaying like the wave, and water dripping down along the grapevines created a beautiful scenery. The restaurant's grilled meats and vegetables were cheap, but tasted delicious. They were made from homegrown, organic ingredients. Sophie's mother, Helen, once again began sharing stories about the house, the restaurant, and shared interesting anecdotes about the town. Sophie and Jacob both enjoyed listening to the stories about what happened before they were born. Even Dracon, who normally remained silent, was in a good mood when talking about the people and origins of Wildcat Mountain. He also chimed in and talked about the lifestyle of people who were of Jacob's grandparents' age, and that drew Jacob and Sophie's interest. Sophie had never experienced things like these, and that was why she was very interested. As for Jacob, he still had vague memories of his childhood. As Dracon kept talking, he felt more and more nostalgic. Halfway through the meal, Sophie felt like looking around and excused herself. Helen didn't stop her. She borrowed an umbrella and asked Jacob to accompany Sophie. Both of them rushed out of the small yard surrounded by the fences and went to the nearby vegetable farm for an adventure. There was very little rain, and Sophie was unwilling to hold the umbrella. She ran forward like a bird who just got released from its cage. She rolled up her pants and went inside the muddy cornfields with her sandals. Jacob wore sneakers and couldn't get down there. He could only watch her walk down the field and feel happy and free. Jacob was nostalgic, too. He remembered going to his grandparents' place in the countryside when he was young, and the countryside at that time was fairly similar to the scenery he was at right now. It was a pity that with the expansion of the city, the countryside was replaced by reinforced concrete, which later became factories, warehouses, and harbors. Sophie's feet were both covered in mud. She finally finished playing in the fields and returned happily to the ridge that Jacob was standing on. Due to the narrowness of the ridge and the slippery mud, she was unable to keep her balance and had to hold on to Jacob. Jacob grabbed her, and they both smiled at each other. They were clearly infatuated and somehow didn't want to hide it anymore. Plus, they were happy being in the countryside. They didn't even get a chance to touch the soil when in the city, so playing the fields felt like a dream come true. The tall cornstalks seemed to separate this field from the world outside, and they felt like they were in their own private world. Jacob looked up, and the chilly rainwater hit his face as he looked at the blue sky. Sophie looked down and smelled the refreshing soil that was drenched in rain. She heard the critters making sounds and smiled. "Let's go check the front, too," Sophie said capriciously as she grabbed Jacob's arm and dragged him along. It was rare for her to enjoy the real happiness of the countryside. How could she go back so easily? They came to a small river after crossing the cornfield. The river water was very clear. Although they didn't see any fish, the cobblestone riverbank was fairly beautiful. The rain dropped on top of the river and created thousands of ripples. Jacob held up the umbrella and let her appreciate the small river. In fact, experiencing the countryside in these mountains and forests not only excited Sophie, but also delighted Jacob. Sophie found a place with shallow water, went inside with her sandals for a bit, then returned to Jacob's side. Seeing that half of her body was soaked in water, Jacob was scared that she would catch a cold and gave her his hand to pull her back. She dragged him towards her instead, and he fell in with a splash. They both laughed loudly and stayed in the water, still holding each other's hand. As they walked back, Sophie continued to breathe heavily along the way, as if she wanted to carry the mountain air with her. They were smiling as they made their way out and returned to the restaurant where Dracon and Helen were waiting for them. Helen didn't blame her daughter when she saw her whole body covered with mud. Instead, she took out a napkin gently and wiped off the rain from her forehead. "How was it?" Dracon asked Jacob. "Pretty good. It's very rare to experience the feeling of the countryside," Jacob replied. "Yeah, we'll be returning to the city soon," Dracon sighed. Jacob nodded and looked at the green and lush mountains to take it all in before leaving. Sophie cuddled inside her mother's arms and seemed like she was reluctant to leave the countryside as well. Yet they had to go back. After half an hour, Dracon took them back to the city. It was still raining. Sophie, who had hiked and played wildly for 2 days, couldn't stop the weariness from sinking in. She leaned on the seat and fell asleep. Jacob looked towards the monotonous landscape of the highway. Feeling the quiet ambiance in the car, he suddenly realized that he seemed to be a lot closer to Sophie's family after the 2-day field trip. Helen and Dracon were indeed very kind to him. "After returning to the city, let's have a family dinner together," Helen, who sat in the front seat, said suddenly. "Family dinner?" Jacob reorganized his thoughts and asked. "Yeah, with Sophie's third uncle, her second uncle's family, and our family," Helen said. Jacob hesitated a bit and then politely refused. "I think it's too soon." "That's fine. We'll bring you back to your school," Helen said. She didn't have any intention of pushing Jacob. Jacob had another reason not to go to dinner. He knew another encounter with Sophie's third uncle could result in another fight. "Does Sophie's father have 2 siblings?" Jacob asked politely. "Yes. You saw her third uncle, Kenneth, the last time. He isn't married and has always been single," said Helen. "Why, what a shock," thought Jacob. "Sophie's second uncle, Ethan, is doing business overseas, but his family is here in the North Atlantic, and we meet quite often," Helen explained. Helen understood Jacob's hesitation about Kenneth and said, "Sophie's third uncle is very diligent in cultivating. He doesn't care about secular matters and never had any thoughts of having a family nor a career. He may look ordinary, but he has the highest cultivation level out of all 3 brothers." "Oh? How does he compare to Susan?" Jacob asked randomly. He remembered that Helen once said that in their circle, Susan already belonged to the top tier. Helen smiled and said, "Even 2 Susans can't beat 1 Kenneth." Jacob's mouth fell open. If Elder Liam couldn't beat Susan and 2 of her couldn't beat Kenneth, that meant that Sophie's third uncle had immense power in the Dragon Clan. As for a person like me, who is still a newbie struggling with the beginner's cultivation technique, Sophie's third uncle could pinch 100 of me into fine powder. Jacob's forehead was covered with a layer of cold sweat. "Her third uncle does not trust mortals easily. But don't worry, he isn't the type of person who kills for no reason," Helen smiled and said, understanding Jacob's look of concern. "No matter what, Sophie's third uncle loves her, and if I so much as put any step out of line, I'll probably die instantaneously at his hands," Jacob thought, as another layer of cold sweat suddenly covered Jacob's forehead.
Please subscribe to the Pocket FM YouTube channel and press the bell icon for instant notification. Check out our channel for more such exciting shows.
Pocket FM.
To unlock all the episodes, click the link in bio.